She didn't just throw the bag, she aimed. The damn thing caught him square in the chest before thudding to the floor, scattering his slippers and the pair of sweatpants he only wore on Sundays. Thomas stood there, blinking, gripping the frame of the doorway like it might hold back the chaos. Natalie was shaking with rage. The kind of rage that came not from betrayal, not from hurt, but from pure, unfiltered entitlement. Dean sat behind her, reclined like a king on the couch Thomas had paid for, one leg slung over the armrest, swirling his beer like it was a victory cigar. "You've lived here rent-free for 3 years," Thomas said. Not shouted, not pleaded, just said it, flat, unflinching. "The mortgage went up. Groceries. Utilities. I just asked you to chip in." Dean belched. "Man, get off it. You're not starving." Natalie spun around, her voice slicing through the air like glass. "I will not have you attacking my family under this roof." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. I thought I paid for this roof." That was the trigger. Her whole body tensed like a loaded spring. Then came the shove, palms against his chest. A wild, uncoordinated burst of fury. He barely stepped back, but it wasn't about impact. It was about intent. She wanted him out. That moment wasn't an argument. It was a verdict. "I said get out," she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. Whether they were from rage, guilt, or pure theater, Thomas didn't care anymore. And Dean, still lounging, lifted his bottle like it was a toast. Later, big guy. Thomas didn't yell. He didn't slam the door or curse or throw anything. He just looked around that house, his house. The crown molding he'd installed with his own hands. The hardwood floors he refinished one summer while they vacationed at her sister's place. The damn dining table where he'd eaten Thanksgiving dinners with people who'd never once said thank you. Then, silently, he bent down, zipped up the bag she'd thrown at him, and walked out the door. They didn't know it, but in that quiet moment, something shifted. They thought they'd won, thought they'd humiliated him. But Thomas wasn't broken. He was free. And that bag? That wasn't his life. It was just a costume he no longer needed to wear. What happened next wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge in the way people imagine it. It was something far colder, sharper, years in the making. And if you've made it this far into the story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Over 90% of people just listen without subscribing, but it seriously motivates our small team to keep pushing these stories out. So if you're one of the few who gets it, thank you. Back to Thomas. The night air was cold, but he didn't pull his jacket tighter. He just stood there on the sidewalk for a few seconds, blinking under the yellow haze of the streetlight, bag in one hand, car keys in the other. The porch light clicked off behind him. The final stamp. No shadows moved in the windows. No one second-guessed their cruelty. He got in the car. Not the newer one. The old Civic he'd kept just in case. Everyone joked about it. "Why not just get rid of that rust bucket?" Dean once said. But Thomas kept it maintained. Quietly. Like everything else he did. He didn't drive to a friend's. Didn't call his son, who lived out of state. He didn't go to a hotel. Instead, he drove across town to a storage unit facility by the old freight tracks. His name wasn't on the lease. It was listed under a business entity, one of 3 he'd quietly registered over the years. Natalie never asked questions about the mail that came in his name to the P.O. box. Unit B17. He punched in the code, rolled the door up. The fluorescent light inside flickered on automatically, illuminating rows of labeled boxes. Neat. Precise. One stood out. Metal. Heavy. Contingency, printed on the lid with a thermal label. He sat on a stool, opened it, and ran his fingers over the binder at the top. Inside, signed affidavits, bank statements, 2 notarized letters, and a legal folder that simply read, "Protective Trust, enacted." Below it, a sealed envelope with a note. "Use only if forced to leave." He smiled, genuinely now, for the first time in weeks. Months. Maybe years. He pulled out his phone and made one call. Just one. A woman answered on the second ring. "Ready?" she asked. "Activate the clause," he said. Effective immediately. Then he hung up, placed the envelope into a different folder, and locked the box again. On his way out, he paused and looked back at the storage unit. In the past, it had felt like a backup plan. A just-in-case. Now it felt like the headquarters of a counterattack. The engine clicked as it cooled, the only sound in the desolate parking lot. No other cars, no cameras, just the rhythmic hum of distant train tracks rolling past the industrial edge of town. Thomas stepped out of the Civic and zipped up his jacket against the cold, his breath fogging up in the headlights' fading glow. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle in his bones. Then he reached into his glove compartment, pulled out a key card, and walked toward the chain-link gate of the storage facility. The keypad still worked like clockwork. He entered the 12-digit code he'd never written down, never shared, never once forgotten. Beep, beep, beep. Click. Gate slid open. He passed by rows of silent, padlocked units until he reached the back corner. Unit B-17. No label, no markings, just the dull steel roll-up and a small scar on the concrete where he once dropped a tool during installation. He crouched, unlocked the heavy-duty padlock, and rolled up the door. Inside, neatly arranged and utterly untouched, sat his contingency box. An old, military-grade, fireproof safe he'd bought secondhand from a government surplus auction. Natalie once joked it was overkill for tax documents. He nodded. Let her believe it. She never saw inside. He lifted the lid slowly. It hissed open. Everything was exactly as he left it. The top tray held a leather binder with pre-signed copies of power of attorney documents, an alternate will, and a notarized memorandum dated just 4 months ago. Nestled beneath it, a sealed envelope bearing the official mark of a trust firm in Vermont. He opened it. Protective Trust, enacted, read the title page. 3 signatures. His attorney's, and the successor trustee, his oldest friend, a retired probate judge who owed Thomas a favor from 1997. Under that trigger clause, activation upon unjust eviction or undue duress by cohabitating parties, specifically named. Thomas flipped the next page. Natalie's name, Dean's name, bold, explicit, signed by both when they'd refinanced the house 2 years ago to cover Dean's gambling debts, something they were certain he'd forgotten. He sat on the metal stool in the corner, unfolded his phone, and opened a secure app, one he'd paid a monthly fee for since 2016 without fail. He pressed a single button. The screen flashed, secure line engaged. A voice answered instantly. Female. Calm. Confirmation. He spoke evenly. Clause activation. As outlined. Immediate effect. There was a pause. Executing. Property status will update in 24 hours. Trust protection is now live. All listed beneficiaries removed except primary trustee. He nodded, though no one could see it. Next step. We begin with the title pull and eviction filing. You'll receive digital copies within the hour. Are you requesting delivery to Party 1? He hesitated for just a moment. Not out of doubt, but precision. Yes. Send it to Dean. At the house. Serve it formally, not electronically. Done. He hung up and sat. The strange thing about revenge, if that's what you want to call it, is that when it's real, when it's tactical, it doesn't come with adrenaline. There was no rush. No shaking hands. Just a growing warmth of inevitability. Like watching the first line of dominoes tip, and knowing the rest will fall without further touch. He stood, stretched, and checked the final compartment in the safe. A second envelope. This one addressed to Natalie. Not for today. For later. A very specific day. The day she tried to touch their accounts. He slid it into his inner coat pocket. That time would come soon enough. On his way out, he paused beside a small red case mounted to the wall. Emergency fire gear. Inside, tucked behind the extinguisher, was a prepaid phone. No one knew it existed. Burner line. GPS disabled. He turned it on. 3 unread messages from his attorney. All greenlit. Already. He texted back one word. Proceed. Back in the car, he didn't drive away immediately. He just watched the gate close in his rearview mirror. The barrier separating who he was from who he had now become. Not the angry husband. Not the pushover. Not the silent bystander. No, this version of Thomas was colder. Legally armed. And patient. Because this wasn't about petty payback. This was about erasure, surgical, silent erasure. Of every leech, lie, and liability they ever represented. And the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. Until the envelope arrived. The photo hit Thomas's feed around 10:42 p.m., a grainy, dimly lit shot of Dean and Natalie clinking champagne flutes in the kitchen he'd remodeled by hand. The kitchen where he'd installed every cabinet, tiled the backsplash, even rewired the overhead lights because Dean once said he couldn't figure out the fuse box. Now Dean was front and center, shirt half-buttoned, holding a drink like he'd just closed escrow on a beach house. Natalie, red-lipped and smiling, leaned into him like she'd just married into royalty. The caption? House is finally peaceful again. Family only. No tags. No mention of Thomas. Just a warm, celebratory knife under the ribs. The comments rolled in like flies to rotting fruit. Yas queen. Clinking glasses, nail polish. So happy for you, girl. Good riddance. And Dean, never one to miss a chance to play the clown, had commented under the post, "The bum's gone. Time to upgrade the liquor." That one made Thomas exhale through his nose. Not a laugh. Something darker. Something measured. He took a screenshot. Then a second one. Then the comments. Date and time included. Metadata preserved. He didn't reply. Didn't react. Didn't even accidentally like the post. Instead, he opened a separate app. A secure channel to someone named Carver. Title: County Housing Enforcement and Compliance Officer. Not a friend. Not exactly. But they had history. He'd helped Carver out once, years ago, during a housing fraud investigation involving another tenant. Never asked for anything in return. Just said, "Maybe one day I'll need you." That day had arrived. Thomas tapped out a short message. Carver. Need expedited occupancy review for 74 Crane Hollow Lane. Possible squatter plus unregistered co-tenant. Documentation follows. He attached the screenshots. The refinance signature page. The trust filing. And a photograph he'd kept in that metal box. A time-stamped image of Dean moving his duffel bags into the house 3 years ago, with the truck license plate clearly visible. Dean had never signed a lease. Never paid rent. Never appeared on utility bills. Never contributed a dime. That had been intentional. Thomas had kept records. And now, Dean wasn't a house guest. He was a squatter. By 11:10 p.m., Carver replied, "Got it. This'll be fun. You'll get your envelope in the morning." Thomas locked his phone and leaned back in the Civic's driver's seat. The storage unit parking lot was still dead quiet. He was parked in the dark corner, engine off, headlights long faded. From the outside, it just looked like a man sleeping in his car. But inside, he was lighting fuses. He pulled a blanket from the back seat, one of those scratchy military-style surplus ones he kept for emergencies, wrapped it around himself, slid the seat back, and let the darkness wash over him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was patient. Natalie and Dean thought they'd won. They thought they'd humiliated him, publicly, online, digitally sealed in a permanent record of emojis and mockery. What they didn't realize was that they'd just created evidence. Timed. Dated. Arrogant. It was perfect. Dean had just publicly declared himself an occupant, celebrated an eviction, and effectively admitted to a legal tenancy. All in a single thread. Natalie had added context and motive. It was like watching suspects confess while drunk on camera. Voluntary. Smug. Legally admissible. And all of it now lived in a folder titled Enforcement Package. At 3:17 a.m., Thomas's phone buzzed once more. No message. Just a calendar update. Scheduled. Site visit. Crane Hollow, 0900 hours. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes, folded his arms under the blanket, and let the silence return. By morning, the internet would still be laughing. But the knock on the door would not be metaphorical. The knock came sharp and fast, 3 firm raps on the front door. Not the lazy, casual knock of a neighbor or package guy. This was official, and loud enough to wake even Dean, who had passed out on the couch in last night's clothes, his phone still clutched in one hand, a half-empty beer can on the floor beside him. He cracked one eye open, groaned, and shuffled to the door barefoot, shirtless, his boxers hanging dangerously low. What the hell? When he opened it, 2 men stood there, uniformed. One in county tan, the other in Navy housing enforcement blue. The taller one spoke. Dean Travers. Dean blinked. Yeah? You're being served." The officer held out a thick, sealed envelope with a crimson county seal on the corner. Legal-sized. Heavy. Dean chuckled nervously and took it like it was a prank. "You guys serious? Is this a joke or something? You got the wrong guy, man. I live here." The second officer, stone-faced, held up a clipboard. "Address matches. Subject identified. Notice delivered." Dean peeled the flap open with one finger, more annoyed than alarmed, until he saw the letterhead. Office of Housing Enforcement and Legal Compliance. Subject: Notice of Unlawful Occupancy and Eviction Order. Filed by Thomas M. Caldwell, legal property owner and protective trustee. His smirk vanished. He flipped through the next pages, citations, dates, documentation, and a stamped copy of the trust conversion. Then he saw it. Enclosed photographic evidence of extended stay, unregistered tenancy, and failure to contribute rent or utilities for a period exceeding 36 months. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His throat went dry. The words blurred. There, at the bottom of the 4th page, was the signature. Thomas M. Caldwell. He had signed in that same cold, deliberate hand Dean used to make fun of. "Looks like you're writing your will every time you write a check," he'd once joked. Now it was a will. Of sorts. Natalie came running down the hallway, barefoot, robe open, her hair in a messy bun. What's going on? Who are they? Dean turned to her, holding out the envelope like it was radioactive. It's from Thomas, he mumbled. He filed something. Says I'm squatting. Natalie snatched the papers from him, her eyes darting across the lines, flipping pages faster and faster, her mouth moving silently. And then, one sharp gasp. This is your house, she cried. This is your house. The taller officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, not according to county records. As of 7:41 this morning, legal ownership is held solely in the name of the Caldwell Protective Trust. You are not listed on any deed or lease. There is no record of rent paid, co-ownership, or tenant agreement filed for either of you. Dean looked like someone had poured boiling water down his back. That can't be right. He lived here. It was his and hers. I've been here for years. Yes, sir, the second officer said calmly. And according to this filing, those years were without contribution, contract, or legal right, which makes this a case of unlawful occupancy under the revised 2022 housing statute. Natalie backed into the wall, gripping the envelope like a shield. He can't do this, she whispered. He can't just erase us. The officer said nothing, and that's when they both noticed the figure standing across the street. Thomas, calm, hands in pockets, dressed in the same gray coat they used to mock him for. The one she said made him look like an insurance adjuster. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just looked. Natalie stepped onto the porch. Thomas, is this? Did you really? He tilted his head slightly, like a scientist observing lab rats bump into the glass. She tried again. You're really doing this? After everything. His voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut stone. No, you did this. Dean moved behind her, still clutching the envelope like it might explode. You don't get to do this, man. You're gone. She kicked you out. You don't live here. Thomas finally smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're right, he said. I don't live here anymore. Then he turned, walked back to his car, and drove off without looking back. Behind him, the two officers handed Natalie a second envelope, this one addressed to her. She didn't open it. Not yet. She just stood there on the porch, wind cutting through her robe, staring at the corner where Thomas's car had disappeared, wondering, what else had he done? The file cabinet was wedged behind a pile of unpacked boxes labeled Christmas decorations and Dean's kitchen SHD, stacked haphazardly in what used to be the home office, before Natalie converted it into a walk-in closet for her seasonal purses. She yanked the drawers open like they'd personally offended her, papers flying onto the floor, tax returns, expired warranties, a receipt from their failed attempt at couples therapy. Where is it? She hissed, flipping through a manila folder labeled Home Purchase Docs. Dean stood behind her, holding a mug of cold coffee, reading through his eviction notice for the 10th time, like maybe one more read would make it disappear. Natalie scanned the pages furiously. Loan application, property tax receipts, a printout from Zillow, useless. But where was the deed? Her name had to be on it. Of course it was. They bought the place right after the wedding. Or did Thomas refinance later? She remembered something about signatures during Dean's debt meltdown, but he had said it was just paperwork stuff. She didn't ask questions. And now, that silence was hunting her. She grabbed her phone and dialed her attorney, Marla Beckwith. Overpriced and perpetually unavailable unless you reminded her you were on the premium tier plan. Marla, it's Natalie. I need you to pull the deed on 74 Crane Hollow. Now. A beat. Then a question. Has something happened? Natalie's voice wavered. Thomas, he filed some kind of trust? I think he changed the title. The officers were here. They served Dean. Marla exhaled. All right. Hold on. Let me check the county records. While she waited, Natalie dug deeper. A blue folder at the bottom caught her eye. Mortgage, refinance 2021. Her heart sank. Two names signed on the last page. Thomas Caldwell and Dean Travers. No mention of her. A clicking sound on the line snapped her back. Marla's voice returned. Neutral. Almost clinical. Natalie, the house was transferred into a revocable trust in 2022 under Thomas's sole authority. 6 months ago, it was reclassified under a protective trust. The document is airtight. And, I'm sorry, your name does not appear anywhere on the title history. Not now. Not ever. Natalie gripped the edge of the cabinet. That can't be right. We were married. I lived here. I decorated every damn wall. Yes, but none of that changes legal ownership, Marla replied. And the fact that it's now listed under a protective trust means. Natalie cut her off. So reverse it. File something. Contest it. Marla's tone sharpened. I tried calling his attorney. They replied with a certified statement. Yeah? What did it say? A pause. Then, quietly, 3 words. Irrevocable. Enforced. Binding. Natalie sat down on the floor. The papers she'd flung moments ago were now scattered around her feet, like fallen feathers from a bird that had flown the coop. Forever. She picked up a holiday card Thomas had written to her mother 3 years ago. Wishing you peace and stability, it said. She almost laughed. Dean, still hovering in the doorway, paced. Okay, but this isn't permanent, right? Like, he can't just erase you. Or me. There's squatter rights. Or something. She looked up at him. Her face had shifted. Less anger now. More realization. He planned this. What? She stood, wiping her palms on her sweatpants. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't heat of the moment. This has been in motion for months. Maybe years. He waited for me to kick him out. That was the trigger. Dean scoffed. That's insane. But Natalie wasn't listening anymore. She was opening drawers, digging behind the old router box, pulling out tax folders. In one, she found it. A thick envelope she'd never opened. Addressed to the Caldwell family household. From a law firm she didn't recognize. Postmarked 6 months ago. She opened it. Inside, a copy of the trust filing. Notice of trust conversion to protective class. Trustee rights exclusive. And at the bottom, a single note handwritten by Thomas. Some assets only reveal their value once they've been abandoned. Dean was behind her, reading over her shoulder now. He didn't laugh. He didn't speak. Because even he could see what she was just now realizing. They hadn't kicked Thomas out of his own house. They had legally, involuntarily, surrendered every right they thought they had. And Thomas? He hadn't run away. He'd baited them into letting go. Dean lost it. Not the fake kind of outrage he usually pulled out during arguments at Thanksgiving, but real, shaking, red-faced fury. The kind that comes when a man realizes, too late, that the system he thought he could charm, laugh off, or bully into submission has already filed the paperwork, stamped it, and printed copies for everyone in the room. I've lived here for years, he roared, crumpling the eviction notice in his fist like that might cancel it. He can't just throw me out like some damn dog. The lead officer, unfazed, checked his watch. Yes, sir, he said evenly. You've lived here, without a lease, without paying rent, and without contributing to household expenses. That legally classifies you as a squatter under County Housing Code Section 8 to 21. Dean's eyes bulged. I'm family. I'm her brother. This is harassment. The officer didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly flipped over the court-stamped notice and pointed to the embossed seal at the bottom. Eviction authorized. Signed by the housing court judge, time-stamped this morning. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Dean's voice cracked. This is his doing. That little weasel planned this. He's trying to make me homeless. Natalie stood in the hallway, arms crossed, but her fingers twitched with tension. She tried to speak once already, earlier, when the officers handed her the second envelope. But the words never came. Now she just stood there, trapped between the wreckage of her ego and the legal freight train bearing down on them. Sir, the second officer said with quiet finality, if you're still here at this address after 72 hours, we will return. With a team. And we will remove you. By force, if necessary. Dean stepped back like he'd been hit. Then, without warning, he spun around and shoved a dining chair across the room. It slammed into the wall with a wooden crack, splintering one leg. You think you're going to push me around? He shouted. Both officers stepped forward at once, their hands drifting to their utility belts. But neither reached for cuffs. Not yet. Don't test us, Mr. Travers, the taller one said. Throwing furniture only escalates things. And right now, the court's given you 72 hours of mercy. Don't make it less. Dean's chest heaved. His eyes darted around the room like maybe there was an escape hatch. But the living room looked different now. Smaller. Not a haven anymore, but a trap with legal bars. The couch he'd lounged on like a throne, legally listed as property of the Caldwell Trust. The TV he'd gamed on for hours, purchased under Thomas's name, with receipts to prove it. The fridge, the washer, even the bed frame upstairs where he crashed sometimes. All documented. All filed. All his, Thomas's. Natalie tried to speak again, voice low. Dean just cooled down. He turned to her, eyes wide. You knew he was doing this? She flinched. No, I didn't. I thought he was bluffing. Dean laughed. A raw, humorless bark. Well, congrats. He wasn't. He damn nuked us. The lead officer folded the clipboard and nodded toward the door. We'll be in touch. You've been formally notified. Start packing. They left without another word. The silence in the house was heavy. Dean stared at the busted chair on the floor. Natalie leaned on the kitchen counter, arms folded so tightly her knuckles turned white. After a long pause, Dean muttered, "We can fight this, right?" She didn't answer. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through the photos, looking for something. Anything. There was a text from Thomas, dated 2 years ago. She never replied. "Can we talk about the mortgage situation? Just want to get on the same page." She had ignored it. Told Dean later that night. He's just being controlling again. Now, she felt like she was standing on the Titanic deck while Thomas drifted away in a lifeboat with the deed. Dean stormed off to his room, slamming the door like it might change gravity. Natalie didn't move, because somewhere deep inside, under the layers of rage, pride, and sarcasm, she finally understood something chilling. Thomas hadn't reacted. He'd prepared. And Dean? Dean was never crashing here. He'd been living on borrowed time from the moment he moved in. And the clock had just hit 0. Natalie sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, screen casting a pale glow against the morning shadows. Her fingers moved fast, tapping in passwords with the urgency of someone sprinting into a building already halfway engulfed in flames. She'd logged into the joint savings account 100 times before. It was routine, even comforting. The same balance greeting her at the top of the screen, Thomas's name beside hers like a digital marriage vow. She knew the digits by heart, every cent, every scheduled deposit, every auto transfer. But today, the screen blinked. Account not found. She refreshed, re-entered credentials, double-checked the routing number. Nothing. Then, finally, after trying through the banking app, desktop site, and even calling up an old bookmarked login, they gave her a new message. "This account has been closed. Please contact your financial institution." Her heart dropped into her stomach. She grabbed her phone and dialed. No music. No wait time. The bank's premium line, thanks to Thomas's account tier, routed her directly to a representative. "Thank you for calling Sterling Bank and Trust. This is Danielle. How can I help you?" Natalie swallowed. "Yes, hi. I'm calling about our joint savings account. It's not letting me log in. I think there's an error." Danielle asked for the usual name, address, last 4 digits, security questions. Natalie answered them all, chewing her nails as she did. Then silence on the line. A shuffle of papers. A clicking keyboard. "Okay, Mrs. Caldwell," Danielle said at last. "I'm looking at the records now. This account was legally dissolved as of last Thursday morning." Natalie blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Yes, ma'am. It was closed under authorization by Mr. Thomas Caldwell. The funds were transferred into an irrevocable property trust, and the associated banking structure was migrated to trust-controlled accounts." Natalie stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Wait. You're telling me he just moved everything? By himself?" "Yes, ma'am," Danielle said again, with the clinical tone of someone who's had this conversation more times than she cares to count. "Mr. Caldwell had full authorization to do so under the trust agreement, which supersedes marital joint ownership in the case of irrevocable designation." Natalie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She glanced over at Dean, who was now sitting on the armrest of the couch, watching her like a man about to witness a train wreck. "This is illegal," she snapped. "We're married. That's our money." There was a pause on the line. Then, soft but firm. "Yes, ma'am. But per the trust terms on file, you are no longer a beneficiary." The words landed like a slap. Natalie sat back down. Her hands trembled over the keyboard. The screen still stared back at her, blank, empty, locked out. Like the whole world had shifted 3 feet to the left, and she hadn't moved with it. "No longer a beneficiary," she whispered. Dean broke the silence. He really planned this. She turned to him slowly. Her expression was blank, but her eyes were wild. "What does that even mean?" He shrugged, gesturing toward the screen. "Means he cut you off. Cut us off. Probably weeks ago. Months, maybe." Natalie shook her head. "No, he wouldn't. He's passive-aggressive, not this." Dean raised his eyebrows. "You threw him out. In front of me. You humiliated him. Online. In public. You gave him the excuse." Natalie stared past him, into the distance. The humming refrigerator sounded like a chainsaw now. Her brain was cycling through the last 6 months. Quiet dinners, brief conversations, Thomas taking more walks than usual, more alone time in the den, fewer arguments. He hadn't pulled away. He'd been withdrawing. Not emotionally. Legally. "I don't even know where the money went," she murmured. Dean scoffed. "Probably not to me." She didn't reply. She just picked up her phone and stared at the last text Thomas had sent her. It was from 3 weeks ago. For words. You'll need your own. She had thought it was about groceries. Now it read like prophecy. Her palms were sweaty, her mouth dry, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel angry. She felt something much colder. Expendable. The envelope arrived by courier. Not mail. Not email. Courier. The kind of delivery reserved for legal notifications, estate summons, and trust directives. Natalie heard the knock around noon. Sharp, formal. She opened the door expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe one of Dean's deadbeat friends returning a borrowed tool. Instead, a man in a slate-gray windbreaker with a county ID handed her a white envelope and said flatly, "Confirmed delivery. Signature not required." She watched him walk away before even opening it. Something in her gut already knew this wasn't good. Inside, notice of lease reassignment and residential reclamation, Crane Hollow property. She skimmed. Her breath hitched. Then she sat down, paper trembling in her hands. Thomas had filed for, and been granted, exclusive lease rights to the secondary dwelling unit behind the house. The little guest cottage he'd built himself over 2 summers, originally meant as a workspace. She had dismissed it back then as Thomas's retreat from being useful. But now it was officially his residence. And because he had relinquished all other residential claim to the main house, legally and publicly, his trust was now reclaiming the main property as a landlord. She read the next line 3 times. Occupants of the primary residence are hereby given 30 days notice to vacate unless formal ownership documentation or court injunction is presented within the legally defined dispute period. She flipped the paper over, praying it was some kind of prank. It wasn't. It had the clerk's seal. Filed. Recorded. Timestamped. Her name did not appear anywhere. Dean came down the stairs a minute later, half-dressed, phone in hand. Someone just posted a TikTok of the cop car from yesterday. Evicting Karen's brother. We're viral now. Natalie didn't respond. He looked at her. What is that? She handed it to him. He read it. Then again. Then sat down, slowly. He's evicting you? Dean said, blinking. I figured I was on thin ice, but you? Natalie's face was a pale mask. He never put me on the deed. Never listed me on the trust. We refinanced using your name because my credit was frozen from that Macy's card lawsuit. Dean rubbed the back of his neck. You said it was temporary. So did you, she snapped. So did you, when you moved in for a few weeks. Silence. Then Dean asked the question she'd been dreading. Can you fight it? She stood up slowly. I don't own anything, Dean. I don't even rent anything. I don't exist on paper. I was just living here. Like you. But worse, because I didn't see it coming. He opened his mouth to say something. Some defense, some snark. But nothing came out. Natalie paced. I laughed when he got that second P.O. box. Thought he was being paranoid. I called it his doomsday mail drop. He just smiled. Never argued. Dean watched her unravel. So what now? She turned on him. Now? Now I have 30 days. Or I go to court. And in court, I have to show ownership. Which means producing a deed. Or a lease. Or anything with my name on it. And you know what I have. Dean waited. Facebook memories. Wedding photos. A dozen sarcastic Instagram captions about how my man does all the boring stuff so I can focus on self-care. That's what I have. Dean leaned back in his chair. He turned the whole house into a business. And we're just squatters in the ledger. Natalie glared. You think this is funny? No, he said. I think this is checkmate. She walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, then dumped it out. Her hands shook. Somewhere in her memory, she could hear Thomas asking, gently, if she wanted to put her name on the refinance papers. She'd waved it off. Said she trusted him. Said she didn't have time. But the truth? She didn't want the responsibility. Now, she had no rights either. That little guest unit, Thomas's retreat, was now the legal epicenter of the property. From it, he'd filed the eviction. From it, he would manage the trust. From it, he would watch them leave. She stared out the window, toward the garden path leading to the guest unit. The light was on. He was home, and she was running out of time. The bell over the diner door jingled with a dull ring as Natalie stepped inside, Dean slinking in behind her like a dog that knew it wasn't welcome. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Laminated menus, vinyl booths, the faint smell of burnt coffee and fryer oil clinging to every surface. It was the kind of place Thomas came to think. To be left alone. The kind of place where the waitress didn't ask questions and the coffee kept coming whether you drank it or not. He was already there. Back booth. Facing the door. Same black coat. Same quiet posture. Same half-eaten plate of roast beef and eggs. He didn't stand up. Didn't offer a greeting. Just gestured to the seats across from him like this was a business meeting, because it was. Natalie sat down first. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass. Dean flopped into the booth with a sigh, trying to look bored but failing miserably. Thomas looked at them. Not with anger. Not even disdain. Just clinical detachment. I assume you're not here for the meatloaf special. Natalie's voice cracked first. You didn't have to go this far. Thomas stirred his coffee. I didn't go anywhere. I stayed exactly where I was. It was you who made me choose between self-respect and silence. Dean snorted. Spare me the wisdom, Buddha. This whole act. You're not a saint, man. You're petty. You waited. You schemed. You're just trying to punish us. Thomas turned to him slowly. I didn't scheme, Dean. I planned. You know the difference. Dean leaned forward. What? You think this ends with a few eviction notices and bank freezes? You can't cut people out of your life like you're flipping switches. We're not just paperwork. Thomas reached down, pulled a small manila envelope from his coat pocket, and slid it across the table. It stopped just inches from Dean's hand. You're right, Thomas said. You're not just paperwork. Dean stared at it. What is this? Page 2, Thomas replied. Paragraph 6. Read it. Carefully. Natalie didn't move. Her eyes locked on the envelope like it was ticking. Dean ripped it open, pulled out a short stack of neatly printed papers, and began reading aloud, until his voice stopped mid-sentence. His mouth opened, then closed. What the hell is this? He whispered. Thomas sipped his coffee. It's the clause you signed in 2021, during the refinance. I didn't sign any. You did. Thomas cut him off. Page 2. Paragraph 6. Occupant agrees to assume retroactive financial liability in the event of undue displacement of legal property trustee. Dean looked up, pale. What's undue displacement? Natalie already knew. She didn't need it explained. Thomas obliged anyway. When a named party, me, is removed from the property without cause or process, such as being thrown out by someone who had no ownership authority, like you and her, Natalie whispered. That's why you left so calmly. I didn't need to shout, Thomas said. The documents were already signed. Dean threw the papers on the table. You think you're going to make me pay damages? Retroactive rent. Thomas leaned forward. No, Dean. I'm not going to make you do anything. He tapped the envelope. The court will. Silence. The waitress came by, refilled Thomas's coffee. Didn't even glance at the other two. Dean was shaking now, his hands balled into fists under the table. You vindictive little. Natalie reached out and stopped him, because she saw it. The final nail wasn't rage. It was composure. Thomas hadn't come here to fight. He'd already won. They just hadn't figured it out until this moment. She looked at her former husband, this quiet, steady man she'd spent years underestimating. And for the first time since this all began, she realized. He hadn't destroyed them. They had. He had simply signed the paperwork. Thomas stood up, dropped a 20 on the table, and looked at them both. I have nothing left to say. You made your choices. Then he walked out into the evening. Dean sat frozen, the envelope still in front of him, the paragraph burning in his eyes. And Natalie? She didn't cry. She just watched him go, like a woman waking up after the last dream she'd ever have. The wind was soft that morning, barely a whisper as it threaded through the garden path, weaving between the planters Thomas had once built on a quiet Sunday while Natalie and Dean were out for brunch. That was the code she used when she didn't want to be asked questions. She'd come home laughing, sometimes a little too flushed. Thomas never asked. Not then. Now, the silence was his again. The stones on the path were still damp from last night's rain, and the ivy he'd trimmed along the guest house fence had started growing back in thick, healthy strands. For once, he didn't mind. The mess was his now, and only his. He stepped barefoot onto the porch of the guest house, a mug of black coffee in one hand. The kind of strong, bitter brew Dean used to gag at. Why don't you get one of those single-serve things, he used to say. You're living in the past, man. Yes, Thomas was living in the past, and he preferred it. In the little mailbox mounted near the door, a leftover from when he'd considered renting the space out, sat a single envelope. White, heavy, stamped with the seal of the county recorder's office. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it was. Still, he peeled it open slowly, deliberately, like a ritual. Inside, one page. Confirmation of final property transfer, protective trust designation approved. Effective immediately. Irrevocable. Thomas exhaled. Long and slow. He folded the letter once, placed it back in the envelope, and slipped it into the drawer of the hallway desk, the one Dean used to toss beer caps into when he couldn't be bothered to clean up after himself. That desk was empty now. Just clean wood, fresh air, and paper. He glanced through the living room window. From here, he could see the main house. The curtains were drawn. The place looked hollow. Natalie was gone. She'd moved in with her mother 2 towns over. No apology, just a text that said, "Fine, you win." He didn't reply. Dean, on the other hand, had tried to return. Twice. The first time was with a box truck and a bad attitude, stomping around the yard demanding his stuff. The second time was quieter. He parked down the block and tried to sneak in through the back gate. That attempt ended with a deputy serving him an official trespass order and a bill for damages. The invoice wasn't small. 2 broken doors, a shattered light fixture, and, ironically, the repair of the same kitchen chair he'd kicked during his tantrum. All of it documented. All of it legally his to pay. Because 5 years ago, during that refinance he barely remembered, Dean had signed a subclause. Buried deep in the paperwork. Page 7, paragraph 10, line 4. In the event of unjust displacement of the trustee by a non-contributing party, said party assumes financial responsibility for any subsequent unpaid occupancy fees, damages, and restitution, calculated at prevailing market rate. It was a throwaway clause. No one ever expected it to be triggered, until it was. The envelope Dean had opened at the diner contained a formal invoice, $74,622.19, calculated retroactively. Interest included. It would follow him for years. Garnish wages. Freeze accounts. Remind him, every month, that silence is not always surrender. Thomas placed the coffee mug on the kitchen counter and walked into the study. The air in the room was cool, shaded from the morning sun. The bookshelves were full again, carefully alphabetized, just how he liked them before the house was overrun with guests. He ran a finger along the spines. History, philosophy, old favorites. He picked one and opened it. No noise. No arguing in the next room. No beer cans under the couch. No smirking commentary from a brother-in-law who thought homeownership meant beers in the fridge and no consequences. Just quiet. He sat down in the chair by the window, the same one Natalie once called sad and lonely. It didn't feel sad now. It felt like freedom. He turned off his phone and started reading again.